Alright, listen up. This is usually the kind of thing I'd put on a music channel, but that generally is a more professional channel, and this is a very much just, hey, come look at this kind of thing. So, I was just messing around a little bit with a basic polyrhythm idea. Just this. Just going up in a circle of fifths, starting from C sharp, since I usually like to compose in C sharp natural minor. And yeah, the only other thing that's really special here is I see that when other people do these sort of like polyrhythm videos that people have almost kind of made a trend after Virtual Riot did some really crazy stuff with polyrhythms. A lot of other people do the same thing every time. Which, to be fair, I guess I'm not that different here, but a lot of people do it where it's like this, and then like actually like something like this, and then it's like this, and then it's like and then this, and then it's just like kind of like you know what I mean. It's just like the same, like everyone's just +1, and they don't really get a whole lot more interesting than that. And it doesn't have to be like that. You can have like polyrhythms that aren't just like the same rhythm but +1, but +1, but +1, +1, but +1 over and over and over. So here we got like sort of a 2, a 3, a 5, and a 7. But what this ends up turning into, let's just say you're definitely not going to see it coming. So anyway, so I got the sound, and right now, you might already be noticing the effect rack is completely full, and I even spilled over into the second effect rack, and I've turned the effects off right now. Well, let's at least turn the first one on, and you already hear some interesting stuff happening. So, okay, first of all, I like bit crushing stuff, so it's bit crushed. It's not very aggressively bit crushed though, so we'll move on. And then the first thing I thought was like transient shaper. So I thought this, as what I had right now, it sounds pleasant enough, but it is kind of boring. And I mean, I was expecting that. I wasn't really going for anything crazy here. This is more something to build off of. But I was thinking, okay, what do I actually want to do here? And what I was thinking was, maybe if these like notes were a bit sharper, a bit more like plinky plonky, that'd be interesting. And so I used the transient shaper to make them sharper. And at first I didn't have any pump, so without any pump it sounds like this. But that's still not kind of what I wanted, and so messing around I thought, what if I just play this really fast? Maximum BPM FL Studio allows for 522. And already, I was like, ooh, I kind of like that. And then I turned up the pump. And it creates this interesting sort of fade in, fade out effect that's kind of been snuck in there. It's like it's dipping in and out as it's going, It sounds a bit like sidechaining, and I thought that sounded nice. So to smooth it up a bit after the fact, I decided to add a disperser with half mix. This is basically a discount way of creating a phaser, but the reason why I don't just use a phaser is because doing it this way allows for a lot more control, and often I feel like doing it this way, the old-fashioned way, you kind of get more subtle effects compared to an actual phaser, which I think I just generally prefer to do it this way than actually using a phaser. It's quote-unquote the more difficult way, but honestly I feel like it sounds better a lot of the time and gives me better control over the sound. I mean, I'm not actually going to do it here, but you can kind of mess around with it with changing the things here as well. You don't get as much direct control if you just use a phaser preset to do that. Anyway, then we use pitch shifters. We got one that's pitching down by 5. 5 down or 7 up will always be to the 5th below for down and the 5th above for up. And that's always going to harmonize very nicely with the note that you're already playing. So usually you don't use pitch shifters to go down by any more or less than, like, it's always an octave usually, because then you're not going to screw up the notes you're already playing. And this does screw up the notes you're already playing, but the way it screws them up is always going to be in a way that harmonizes perfectly with the note you were supposed to be playing anyway. So if you mix that in with half mix, it doesn't sound too bad, even though it's technically making all the notes very messy and not technically perfectly fit the scale. Thingy. And then there's another pitch shifter. This one's pitching up an octave because I felt like there was a bit too much low frequency content here. It's not very mixed in, that's because it's very annoying and very noticeable. I turned a correlate off and turned up the grain size, which makes it sound like this. Compared to... It makes it sound like it's just one continuous buzzing sound. so that's why it's kind of on the lower end. It's just to give a little bit of colour to the higher frequencies. And this is where we start to go off the rails. I'm going to ignore this EQ for now because it was added later. We pitch map it to make everything more on pitch, and we get an interesting sort of pad-like sound here. And already I'm quite liking this. But this is where I decide to go fucking insane. And I decide, hey, you know what? How about we just triple OTT this thing? If you weren't aware, don't get me wrong, this alone isn't instantly going to give you like a Barely Alive quality bases, but the general technique that Barely Alive employs to get his signature extremely aggressive growl basses that are extremely crunchy and all that is to basically just take a signal, triple OTT it, and bandpass it before the triple OTT, and you get the extremely like guttural growl sounds from using the moving around the bandpass and using the triple OTT. So when I add the triple OTT, I expect the sound to become extremely crunchy. But the problem is that this sound is extremely smooth and soft already. So I kind of don't know what to expect. How crunchy is it going to be? I was kind of interested to see what would happen if I tried to do that. So that result was kind of what I was expecting, which I was a little bit disappointed about at first because that's not what I wanted. I was kind of expecting that result because usually if there's not much high frequency content in the sound to begin with, what OTT actually even does, besides just make sound good instantly just for slapping it on, is it crunches all the frequency ranges to be about equal in volume, so medium, low, and high, you get a decent spread of both. But since this sound by default, like, you know, it's not supposed to have any high frequency content, when it tries to find high frequency content, it mostly just finds background noise and cranks it the fuck up. There is a little bit of the actual sound in there, but a lot of it is just going to be like very, very ambient, like light hissing that you wouldn't be able to hear, like over the sound of the rest of the sound, usually being crunched up to an audible level. And so it kind of makes sense that it gets this kind of result. But this is before we apply the bandpass. So here's the bandpass. And usually when I use a bandpass, I would use it much wider and I'd move it around like this. And I mean, you can hear a little bit of the Barely Alive growl in there, but not really a lot. And that's because usually you would sample something a lot sharper. I mean, I knew this wasn't exactly the ideal candidate sound for the traditional Barely Alive growl. I mean, it was kind of the fact that I knew it wasn't what you would usually do this to is why I wanted to try it and see how it turned out. But yeah, it definitely didn't make for a, you know, it's not terrible, but it's definitely not the growl I was going for. Anyway, but then I decide, you know what, I'm just curious, what does this sound like with a much thinner bandpass? I don't usually use very thin bandpass. And especially I notice that when I'm using this bandpass, you get more interesting results when I just isolate the high end, since that's especially, I already mentioned, the OTT is making things appear in the high end where originally there was basically nothing. So a lot of that is going to be practically nothing but just crunchy audio artifacts that barely even come from the original sound, even though they technically do. And so it's like, okay, what happens if I just take that then? This is the realm of chaos. And it's like, okay, yeah, that's interesting, but it's still too wide. And so, using the thinner bandpass, it's like, okay, what does it sound like if I take some high frequencies now? You get some interesting tones, but overall, you know, I'm still kind of not impressed, until eventually I do what was initially a mistake. Oh wait, I just realised I forgot to turn off the... yeah, I got a wave shaper over here as well, so I forgot to turn that on. But yeah, I don't think there's a glitch. Oh yeah, it makes this sound better. So, I accidentally, well, not accidentally, but just, I kind of leave this thing here, and I'm going to move it later, but I go to play the sound by accident at one point, and I hear this. Holy shit. That is a fucking really cool sounding buzz sound. I really like that kind of sound. And yeah, it's essentially just the fact that, like, I mean, if I get rid of all the OTTs, you can see if you look up top that there is an audio signal coming in, but it's just so, like, non-existent as is right now. And the triple OTT crunches this, like, barely audible noise to a point where you can actually hear it very, very clearly. And that's how you get the craziness that we hear. So, like, one OTT. Still don't really know if I can hear anything, I don't think so. Two OTTs. Oh, hang on a minute. And then three. And then you can even do even more weird stuff here by changing the sample rate. A lot of what creates the tone here is the bit crushing after crunching the hell out of those audio artifacts. If I get rid of this bit crush, if I just set the sample rate to what it usually is without bit crush, 44.1 kilohertz, the result is going to be really, really unpleasant. Oh, actually, sorry, I forgot. Is there a second? Oh, no, there isn't a second bit crush here. Oh, I thought that it would be audible. Yeah, okay, so like, you can hear a little bit of a high-pitched buzz, but it's mostly like so high-pitched you can't even really hear it. And then you start to hear... Yep, as you reduce that sample rate, what starts happening is, well, I can't fully explain it in this video, this isn't really like a tutorial video that'll be going up on the actual music channel, the proper one. But basically, there's a certain frequency point called Nyquist where your sound's frequency is so high that your sample rate can't support it, and it leads to a really weird and cool interaction where higher frequencies actually become lower pitched by trying to crank them above Nyquist. And Nyquist moves depending on what your sample rate is. And so by using bit crush to reduce your sample rate, you can start basically bending the laws of sound within the context of this song and making it so up becomes down and down becomes up once you pass the point of no return with Nyquist. And it leads to some really, really cool audio artifacts. I'm not gonna lie, I use this all the time. Like, genuinely, it sounds like it's like something really esoteric, very specific piece of knowledge, and it probably is to most people. But I don't know, to me, I get so many cool sounds by abusing Nyquist that, like, I do it all the time in basically every bass I make. So yeah. Oh yeah. Also, you got to make sure too that this is I don't know what bit crush plugin you would be using, but you got to make sure that the sample rate is what you're changing, because if it's the bit depth, which is what bits means here, that just affects how much the volume jumps around. It doesn't affect the actual sample rate. So if I set this to full here, if I reduce the amount of bits, it's not gonna actually have that cool effect on the sound. Instead, it's gonna... You can see what it's doing over here. It's making it so that like it has to round the volumes up and down a lot. Which, I mean, you might want that sometimes, but that's not what we want here. Which is why the bits is at maximum, even though the sound is sounding super bit crush. Because this bits means bit depth, not sample rate. Oh, that's actually that is really good. That'll be a good thing to work with to make like a growl sound. But yeah, I am not gonna lie, there wasn't much plan here. It was literally just, I made this sound, I thought it was really cool, I wanted to show it off, and this would usually go on the music channel, but again, the music channel usually makes more properly produced videos, and this is pretty casual, and this is pretty much just, hey, here's a cool sound. There you go. With all that said, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.